In the final section of this module, we will compare various REST APIs provided by Salesforce on various parameters. This will help you decide which is the best API to use based on your business requirements. If you want to create, update, upsert, delete or retrieve a single record in Salesforce, all the APIs support these operations, except for the sObject tree, that supports only insert operation. Using sObject tree, you cannot perform any operations like update, upsert, delete or get. So, this is pretty straightforward. If you want to work with multiple records, then using simple REST API is not an option at all, as it is not a composite resource and you can just perform one action on one record. If you want to create or insert multiple records, then except for REST API, you can use any other API. For update, upsert, delete or to get field values based on record IDs, your options are all the other APIs except for REST API and sObject tree API. If you want to create parent-child records in different objects, then you can use Composite Graph or sObject tree APIs. These APIs will allow you to create a parent record and then create the child records for the parent record in one call itself. The record ID of the parent record will pass to child record to establish the relationship. If you want to execute requests, where you want to pass the output of one subrequest as an input to another subrequest, then there are only two APIs that you can use, Composite and Composite Graph. Like, for example, you want to get the phone number from account record and pass that as an input to the contact record that you want to create. You can achieve this using a single API call. You can execute a SOQL query using REST API, Composite API and Composite Batch API only. And you can run a SOZL search using REST API and Composite Batch API only. No other APIs support these operations. Then, if you want to execute requests of different types, like you want to create 2 records, update 3 records and delete 4 records, your options are to use Composite, Composite Graph and Composite Batch APIs. Each APIs have their own limits in terms of how many requests, subrequests or records they can process. So, with REST API, you can execute just one request on one record. With Composite API, you can execute 25 subrequests. With Composite Graph API, the number increases to 500 subrequests in a single call. Composite Batch API has the limit of 25 requests. Using sObject tree, you can insert 200 records across multiple objects in a single call. And using sObject Collections API, you can insert, update, upsert or delete 200 records at a time. Executing multiple requests in a single call will not only give you performance benefits, but will also save your governor limits. As you can see here, all the APIs, except Composite Batch API, consumes just one API limit per call. Composite Batch API consumes one API call per subrequest. So even if you execute 25 requests in a single call, you will actually be consuming 25 API calls from governor limits perspective. If API governor limits are a concern in your Salesforce org, switching to a more friendly API can help you stay within your limits. Request and subrequest depth. In the context of Composite and Composite Graph APIs, this refers to passing the output of one subrequest as an input to another subrequest. Let's understand this with the help of this illustration. Consider this table here. Let's say that in a Composite API, we need to create multiple account records. The parent account for second account needs to be set to account 1. The parent account for third account needs to be set to account 2 and so on. The request body of this request will look something like this, where we will use the reference IDs of the previous request in subsequent requests. In the code for account 2, we will set the parent ID to reference ID of account 1. In the code for account 3, we will set the parent ID to reference ID of account 2. And so on. So for subrequest 1, since it is not using the reference ID of any other SON request, it will be considered to be at depth 1. For subrequest 2, since it is using the reference ID of subrequest 1, it will be considered to be at depth 2. The key point to note here is that the depth increases only when you are using the reference ID of another subrequest. This is different than the number of subrequests. Going by this logic and coming back to the table, if you try to execute subrequest 16 and set the parent ID as account 15, this API call will fail as it will exceed the maximum depth limit of 15. Similar to the concept of subrequest depth in Composite and Composite Graph APIs, we have a limit on the levels in sObject tree API. Consider this code for sObject tree request body. In this API, when you need to create records in parent-child relationship, the child records needs to be nested inside the parent record. Here we are inserting a record in the account object. Let's call it the root parent record. This will be considered to be at level 1. Then we are inserting another account record as a child to the root parent record. This will be considered to be at level 2. Underneath that, we are inserting contact record for the root parent record. This will also be considered to be at level 2. And nested within the contact record, we are creating a case record. This will be considered to be at level 3, since it is nested within the contact record, which itself is at level 2. And then, finally we are creating 2 opportunity records under the parent record. This will be considered to be at level 2. In sObject tree API, the maximum levels that you can go up to is 5. If you try to go beyond this limit, the call will fail with error. In terms of message format, Composite and Composite Graph APIs supports JSON only, whereas all other APIs support both JSON and XML. And these are the Salesforce versions in which these APIs were first introduced. When you are sending multiple requests in an API call, some of those calls may fail because of various reasons. For example, if you are creating a record and do not populate one of the mandatory fields in that object, the call will fail. Or the user credentials that you are using may not have the delete privileges on a particular object, and you have made a request to delete record from that object. In such cases, Salesforce gives you an option to specify whether to continue processing the remaining requests or just fail the entire call and roll back the transactions. For APIs like Composite and sObject collections, you can explicitly mention how to handle errors by providing the value of the property all or none. However, for APIs like Composite Graph, Composite Batch and sObject tree, Salesforce will implicitly decide how the errors will be handled, and you don't have the option to choose. And finally, here is the list of all the main endpoints that you need to use to call different types of APIs. Please do note that this is not an exhaustive list. It just covers the endpoints that are mostly used. As you can see, each of these endpoints correspond to a specific Composite API, and the naming convention quite clearly depicts the APIs they correspond to. That brings us to the end of this comparison. Please note that this section is a part of our complete training course on mastering Salesforce APIs. You may want to check it out at the URL shown here. This URL has also been mentioned in the description below. Whether you are a Salesforce admin, consultant, developer or architect, this course will arm you with knowledge and skills to have a solid understanding of how Salesforce APIs work. It comes with free preview and 100% money back guarantee. Thanks for watching.